Hello, my friends. We're out in the woods taking a walk. I thought maybe I'd do a video on what drives us. What's our core motivation when it comes to being prepared? And you could say that it's just the overall sense of having security, feeling comfortable that you have redundancies. And that's a valid answer, but they're typically, from the people that I've seen in my life, there typically is one or two categories within your prepping that motivates you or drives you more than anything else. And it may even been the starting point of why you start to prepare. For example, you might have been in a situation that you've been stranded somewhere and you had no communication. And so maybe now communication is a high priority. You might have been stranded somewhere, maybe in the backcountry with no food or water. And you know what that's like, and you don't want that to ever happen again. And so you prepare and you add a lot of food and water in your cache. And so these are the kind of things that if we stop and look at what categories within the prepping that we do, I think it'll become clear pretty quick. In fact, it's pretty easy for a lot of us if we stop and just think about what category of preps do we think about the most. What do we dwell on the most? What do we put the most planning and resources into? And this is typically a fairly normal thing, though. We see that preppers, it's not really an imbalance. It's just that we have various priorities. Like for me, for example, I like to have a lot of redundant communication. And it's not so much that I've had a crisis or some type of bad experience that I couldn't contact someone that I needed to. But I will say, though, that there is a deeper drive. So I have to say that's probably one of my top preps is that and water. Because I have been in some situations that I've been dehydrated before pretty bad, and it's really not a pleasant experience. So having water filters, a lot of stored water, and communications are really big for me, even though I know the other ones are important, and I do treat them as a high priority, especially those that are even, essential in the same manner in the sense of like food and first aid. You have to have it. But I just noticed that I pay a lot more attention to the level of water that I have and how many different means of communication that I have. And so some people that, for example, maybe you work in the medical field, and so you're very much driven possibly by your medical preps as a driving force to kind of get you into prepping. And once you're in there, you're like, okay, look at all these other categories. And so I'm going to go ahead and work on those. So there's an entry point typically within the prepping lifestyle. You don't just kind of typically fall into it by accident. You kind of usually have something that brings you into it. And so now some people were raised into it, and so that's different in a way. And there are people that have the general preparedness mindset that they didn't have to be taught that. So there's a lot of different variables. But for example, in the woods right here, it's important, like for me to have a few ways of communication besides my cell phone, like a whistle. Sometimes I'll even carry a two-way radio, that is able to communicate with other people outside of this area, So, I mean, there's a lot of things that can satisfy that. For example, I'm an amateur radio operator, and I've been a ham operator for a long time. If you're not familiar with amateur radio or ham radio, check that out. It's very cool. I think preppers should probably at least know some basics of that. And so I think that is something that for me is important, and I've been into radio communications ever since I was in early college, and it's just something that really I connect with, and I can't really explain it sometimes. And so there's a lot of other things that people connect with as well. I know some people are really into their tools, and I like my tools as well, don't get me wrong, but there's less of a connection typically than with other things, like my radios. So I think that you just have to identify those things that you do connect with and just be honest with yourself, embrace that, but then just be aware, though, that is your driving force, so don't neglect that because it may actually in some ways, it can actually limit your ability to want to pursue other things within prepping if you deny yourself the main driving force. And so it's tricky, it's tricky. There's a lot of times I say to myself, I don't need any more radios, and I haven't bought one for a long time. But it's the whole point that I still like to learn about it. So it's not so much that you have to buy these things constantly. You can just learn about new things within that category that drives you. Thanks for coming along. You guys take care.